Greetings, hope, tap, peace, all that good stuff. Real quick before we get into this video, again, just want to make some announcements. Got the ritual this weekend, Friday, August 25th, 7:30 p.m. at Cultural Expressions in Hollywood, Florida. We will be doing another black mass followed with the ritual of the black serpent of a pep, and we'll be doing some drumming right after that ritual, which is incorporated in it, and we'll have about an hour and a half question and answer class session right after that ritual. Again, that's Friday, August 25th at 7:30 p.m. sharp. The dress attire for that event is a black robe or all black clothing. No jeans, t-shirts, or shorts. If you would like more information on that event, time, the location, we can send you the flyer with all the information on it. You can email us at khnum19@gmail.com. That's khnum19@gmail.com. Also, those interested in receiving spiritual consultations, so you don't have to hit me up with an email, how does it work and how much does it cost, etc. I'll get that out of the way, as I do now in the beginning of every video. It saves me time and saves you time. Consultation can be done either in person. If you can't get to me in person, it can be done via Skype. I prefer Google Hangouts. It always seems to be a better connection. Or any other form of social media, but preferably Skype or Google Hangouts. It can be paid for via PayPal or Square. I charge $50 to do that. If you do it on social media, it's $52 because they charge a $2 fee to process it. And it lasts up until 1 hour. And in that consultation, you can dictate. We can talk about anything you want to talk about, anything that you want to discuss. We can focus on particular areas, or we can just do a general consultation. I pretty much will convey anything during that consultation that comes through as far as ancestral spirits, any archetypes that you're working with or dealing with. In addition, as that consultation takes place. But again, the consultation can be used if you're new on this path and you want to know how best way to start out, how to set up altars, how to work this path, etc. You might be advanced and want to focus on more of an advanced topic. It doesn't matter. There is no set format to it. You kind of dictate what you want to focus on and deal with in that consultation. So again, it costs $50 to do that. If you do it via social media, like Google Hangouts or Skype, $52. It lasts up until 1 hour. And if you would like to set up an appointment for that, you can email me at the same address, khnum19@gmail.com. All right, having gotten that out of the way, what I want to focus on this week, kind of piggyback off of last week's video, set the serpent of darkness. I want to talk a little bit about the vampire gods. Two aspects of it, not just the gods, vampire gods and goddesses. I'll focus on just a couple, and then you as an individual being a vampire god that's practicing the spiritual system of vampirism. We're going to get a little bit into that and talk a little bit about that today, because that is important to understand how this system works. Because when you understand how this system works, it's easier if you're, let's per se say you're new and you're trying to start out on this path. You need to understand it is an absorption energy type of system that works two ways. Can be very powerful when you absorb the energy and work it. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And it can be very draining if, say, you don't use it correctly. All right. So I'm going to go into a brief section here in the Second Mapet book, just to give some good key points on vampirism. So let's read. Here's a quote from the Den part. The separation of man, and in this case females too, from relations with the invisible power is owing to his turning at once towards the dark power connected with this world. Okay? Let me say that again if you missed it. The separation of man or women from relations with the invisible power is owing to his turning at once towards the dark power connected with this world. You really can't understand what life is about, what the world is about, until you connect what they refer in this particular quote to what we call dark power. Now, again, the mind can't wander and get spooky, because if you hear dark power and you're your mind is going Spookville, and you're thinking horror movies and terror, and you're completely confused. Again, it means that area of no boundaries, unlimitation, pure ability to evolve into, what we call a god or a goddess. Okay? So then it goes on to say, the black adept who under will decides the path of predatory spirituality is for them will slowly begin to look at the world differently. Now remember, bottom line is this: in any situation in life, you're either predator or prey. We've talked about this before. I did a video a while back on that. And you're going to find out, no matter what system you practice, no matter whether it's sports, whether it's your job, that predator-prey concept can be applied in a lot of situations, everyday scenarios, everyday life, everyday living. So we're not just talking about the spiritual practice of vampirism. So pay attention when somebody is completely engulfed in this spiritual system. When it says they look at the world differently, you're not going to look at, it's not always about turn the other cheek. It's not always about I need to be humble and love everybody. That's a bunch of bullshit. You should have some, as I said before, I mentioned this I believe before, you should have some adversaries that you're keeping at bay. That means you're doing something right. And you should have people that you are, quote unquote, trying to uplift or send blessings to. But if you're constantly cursing enemies and trying to fight enemies, and you're constantly blessing people, you're either too much of a dickhead or you're too weak and humble. Okay? The vampire takes that fine line in between. A predator knows when to keep his enemies at bay and when to strike. Okay? So this is important, very important to understand. Okay? It goes on to also say, this is one part of the process of self-transformation. This type of transformation will redefine your consciousness and will mirror your subconscious mind in a new sense of balance between the predatory and higher articulation of the self. The gods from the time of Egypt, and I'm not going to do it in this video, I'm going to get also into vampirism in Egypt. That's going to be the next video, so we're not going to get too much into that today, but this goes on to say the gods from the time of Egypt, Babylon, Greece, and onward mirror the collective desires of the subconscious or collective unconscious of the mass of humanity. Okay? This can be said for the Egyptian gods and pharaohs. Unas, spelled U-A-N-S, is a perfect example, for he consumed the energies of the gods to become a greater deity and sit among the other gods. Now, Unas was a pharaoh. And as we've mentioned before, I know we've talked about it on the radio show. I've mentioned it here and there in previous videos. Pharaoh Unas was one of the masters at practicing what we would term modern day vampirism. The ability to absorb the energy of the gods. Now remember, being a vampire, or which somebody falsely pronounced vampire, is somebody that's able to absorb the energy of a deity or a god, or individual in this case. It could be anything. Not necessarily what we term as a god. Now, we talked about before, get out of your mind that being a vampire is about drinking blood and biting people's necks and all that. Because remember, that's as these stories got passed down through times, obviously Hollywood and other means decided to run with this. Okay? Well, hold on, I'm going to move this camera. Hold on 1 second. Just going to move this over here. Just give me 1 sec. Relocate real quick. Sorry about that. I just had to relocate. Have my little guy come in. I didn't want him to disturb. All right. So as we said before, it's not a system of, again, biting necks and drinking blood as Hollywood has falsely passed it. It's the ability and the science of absorbing the energy of the gods. And this is the spiritual science, or the core science, of what vampirism represents. All right, so let's go on. It goes on to say, Black adepts do not view the gods as something to worship in an anthropomorphic or literal sense. I've said that a million times. In order to understand this path, and pretty much all right-hand paths, or all fluffy spiritual paths, as I like to call it, or religions, it's always worshiping something external. A black adept never looks at a deity as something to externally be worshipped. And this is probably the most basic step, or the most complicated step for an individual to bypass or get by, especially for an individual per se that's very religious. Okay? The deific mask, or gods, talking about ancient Egypt, are manifestations of the unconscious or desires of the individual and a phenomena in nature. So there's symbols in that. So people, when you look at the Egyptian pantheon, why are they synonymous with certain symbols as far as when it talks, when it shows them wearing the masks of certain animals? Because it represents a certain character, a personality, a nature. It don't mean that these were individuals that were half human with animal heads walking around. I'm talking, there are still, believe it or not, ignorant people that believe that bullshit, because they don't understand what it symbolically represents. Because, as it says here, they are manifestations of the unconscious or desires of the individual and the phenomena in nature. Okay? The gods of today are those of the sky, creative gods, whose destructive pleasures are kept hidden. Okay? Like the misdeeds of public officials, the gods for the black adept must serve the self and the needs of the mind, spirit, and body. And let's just talk real quick, briefly, about a couple of key ones. And I'll talk about a couple of key ones that I work with frequently. So I want to focus on, real quick, Sekhmet, Kali, Set. We can focus on some of these three because they're aggressive in nature. This is the best way I can describe it. They're path clearing, with very raw aggression as far as moving certain obstacles out of your way. And sometimes it's not always done on your terms. When invoking that type of energy that resides in the subconscious, it can be very, very, very intense. And it can, as I've mentioned before in the past, it can bring a whirlwind of abrupt change, whether you're ready for it or not. You could even throw the aspect of, as we talked about last week, of Pep. The Serpent of Darkness is another one of those vampiric or strong type of energies. Now, in relation, a vampire would absorb the consciousness and energy. Not just, you don't just do this with the vampire gods, but I mean, we're talking about that, or those that are classified as dark gods. You could do this with any deity. You could even do it with some of the lighter deities, be it Tahuti or Usir or Osiris, etc. A true vampire that knows how to work these spiritual systems is able to absorb the spiritual energy and consciousness that these gods represent, and they become what that god represents. In the sense, when you're doing a ritual, you're not trying to invoke an energy per se to manifest something outside of yourself. You're trying to embody what that particular god or goddess represents. You become or embody the energy, and by embodying and absorbing that energy, it makes you a god, because you now possess godlike qualities. Now, this is what Pharaoh Unas was the master at doing. You understand? And that's why he was considered a god during his period. Because, see, when you term a god or a goddess, don't confuse that, again, as I said before, what monotheistic religion classifies as a god or a goddess, because you're going to get fucked up and you're going to get confused. And unfortunately, some people's definition of what a god and a goddess is still falls under religious ideology. And that's not what a god or a goddess is. That's a monotheistic definition of what a god or a goddess is. But I'm going to continue on here. The black adept who enters the path of the vampire will view his or her own body as a temple, and that their mind and spirit are the manifestations of the god. So what's the manifestation of the god? Not looking at some external statue or some external image and creating the illusion that there's something external manifesting outside of yourself. Okay, it goes on to say here that their mind and spirit are the manifestations of the God in which they are. Okay, defining a God is something you are aspiring to be like, that which brings you something beneficial in the end. Black adepts define their existence by purpose and motion towards the experience and goals. This is why many Luciferians consider themselves vampiric in some way or another. And if you're familiar with Luciferian magic, there most definitely is that vampiric spirituality in Luciferian magic in many different aspects. We seek continual, it goes on to say, experience and understand we are ultimately responsible for our own destiny. And again, this is another key principle on most left-hand paths in general. We take responsibility, or we take full ownership of our own destiny. We don't put our fate or destiny in somebody else's hand. We don't follow anything or anybody. We're not looking for somebody to guide us to some promised land. We're not looking for somebody to guide us to some euphoria or some paradise that doesn't exist. Because those are all slave mentality, slave concepts that keep you oppressed. The pie in the sky theory. Follow all the rules and regulations. Be good, and you're going to get to that point where you're going to have your reward in the sky. That's not how it works. That's not what any path on the left-hand path is about. You take responsibility for your own destiny. You don't put your destiny in anybody else's hands. That's what fall under one of the terms of definition of what it truly means to be a god or a goddess. Not putting your destiny in somebody else's hands. See the difference between that definition and then God is some old man figure sitting on a chair in the clouds and he control. No. See, that's that faith and mythology and that spookism and that mental slavery that compounds the mind. So when you present it with concepts of this information, it's hard for you to correlate. So that's the difference or the definition of being a god or a goddess, or one aspect of being a god or a goddess on this path. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get through this section here. When invoking or calling the perceived power of the god, understand that you must center yourself in expanding and strengthening the body, mind, and spirit, which the god must harmonize with your inner drive. The question of believing in spirits, gods, or whatnot is not relevant in this context. What brings you tangible results in your life are. Okay? And look, I've said this a million times. And I'm not talking about on a mundane level. If you look at what you do spiritually, what you practice, gauge it by the results. That's the reality. If you are getting results, if you're truly growing, I don't care what it is. If it's something fluffy, you've mastered it, you're growing, power to you. But if you're stuck in something and there's no growth, there is no change, then what you are practicing is dead and is not for you, because it's not bringing consistent change and growth. Anything that doesn't bring consistent change or growth must be reevaluated and sometimes must be put to death. Okay? Death in the sense, must be put to death in the sense that it should no longer be practiced or part of your spirituality, your spiritual system. And death in the sense that you need to bypass it, destroy it, and move on and evolve into something that is more productive. It's that simple. Okay? The left-hand path, as associated with this type of vampirism, is not evil in itself. And I just talked about this a few minutes ago, but we're going to go over this again real quick. The left-hand path is a separation of the mind from the natural order of monotheistic and sheep-herding thought. Okay, I just talked about that, but let's review real quick. The left-hand path in general is simply about separating. This also ties into an aspect of the isolated consciousness of Set and what that isolated consciousness represents. And they use the term here in this passage, which is funny, the monotheistic sheep-herding mindset or thought process, because most people that are in religion are sheeple. They're ripe for the picking. They're followers, they're programmed, they're doers. And they use the word monotheistic. Somebody on this path doesn't perceive spirituality and what God is from a monotheistic thought or perspective. That's the whole point. So an individual on this path has completely separated themselves, or more so as it says here, their mind, from the natural order of these fictitious monotheistic belief patterns and thought systems. Okay? The vampire, as it is spelled, Vampyre, it is a self-liberated individual who is aware of the role of nature, but there is a food chain, and that he or she is responsible for their own development. Okay, who's responsible for your growth and your development? Is it any spook god in the sky? Is it your pastor, your rabbi, your imam? No, none of them are responsible. Okay, you might be in any one of those religions and given them that responsibility, or put your destiny and fate in their hands, which is very foolish, because now you have no control. But in all essence, the only one in the end that's really responsible for it is you. That's just bottom line. Okay? Those who have practiced and developed their initiatory ascension in the art of vampirism will have experienced many of the occurrences which often expand consciousness into other realms of being. To be specific, black adepts who have developed their astral projection and dreaming body will be able to fly forth in the night via a dream or nightmare workings. These types of dreams are vivid and often linger in the conscious memory for a period of time after waking. It is important to keep a journal of these experiences as they happen. Astral projection or dreaming or out of body, lucid dreaming, things of that nature are very, very important on this path, because this is how one is able to travel other realms. This is how one is able to make contact, quote unquote, and I'm going to use terms that people can relate to, the spiritual world or the spiritual realm. I have to use a term that people can grasp. When you experience astral projection or some form of out of body spiritual experience, you really understand the power that resides within you as a god or a goddess, because you're not confined to person, place, or thing anymore. You're not confined to three-dimensional things, because people vibrate so much on a three-dimensional existence that they can't understand who and what God is. And you can't understand who and what God is if you're constantly looking at it from a person, place, or thing perspective. It's very hard to grasp that concept. So we've always trying to answer this question for years. Scholars have always tried to answer this question for years, and they can only answer it in a faith or belief system, because you can't answer that question looking at it through the eyes of a three-dimensional being. And the only way you can have that experience and get that different perception outside of three-dimensional is through the ability or the sciences or the spiritual practices per se of astral projection, because it's an experience that one must feel and go through in order to have a real grasp of what that means. So I'm not going to sit here all day and explain it in words, but bottom line is, if you have not experienced it, those words are only going to mean so much, because you can only go based on the words that you're hearing, and that necessarily is not going to explain it to the fullest. Okay, so it's very important to understand that. All right, let's skip down here. As a black adept has experienced the draining of blood current, not drinking blood, blood current, okay, or utilizing vampirism in the tunnels of Set, there will be specific experiences around dreaming communion. Often the dreaming body will go forth to a type of sabbat and commune with what can be perceived as other vampire black adepts who are communicating with others. These types of experiences are very intense and offering empowering to the waking mind. So once you tap into that realm, you start connecting with this energy on a multi-dynamic level. You start connecting with other people that are locked into that system of spirituality. You start connecting with a lot of those forces, vampiric gods, that are connected to this spirituality. Let's say, as it used here, the tunnels of Set was the term that it used here. So it's very powerful. Now again, I'm going to be honest with you. Is this for everybody? Absolutely not. This is a spiritual system on the left-hand path. You definitely should thoroughly research and investigate. And do your research and feel comfortable if this is a path or a road that you go down, because it is not a path for everybody. And again, for people, as I said before, because we have a lot of melanated people that are just so stuck on this, Kemetic and everything is Africa and Kemet and Egypt, and that's great, but nobody ever talks about black magic of ancient Egypt. And this is probably the origin, or is the origin of the left-hand path, is the origin of these dark sciences, or what we call black magic. And that's why you'll see I always term and talk about the origin of the left-hand path of ancient Egypt. These spiritual sciences existed in Egypt. Nobody talks about this shit. Everybody just wants to talk about all the fluffy and nice stuff of Egypt that sounds spiritual and light, etc. And it goes beyond that. It goes a lot deeper than that. And it's there. It's just nobody wants to, again, tackle it or talk about it. They just want to get into the religious, always this religious interpretation of ancient Egypt, okay? And that's not what this is about, okay? All right, then it goes on to say, vampires often find a gateway to their projection via the sigil of the Varkolachi. Now, the Varkolachi symbol, I have that actually in my altar room. You might have seen a video where you'll see a red banner and you'll see the pentagram with two winged bats on each side. That's a powerful symbol in vampirism for what it represents, because the bat is a symbol of absorption. It's a symbol of, it's a predator. And this has always been a synonymous symbol with the spiritual path, okay? And sigils are very important on this path too, because there's a lot of different sigils that one can work with dealing with vampirism. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the sigil of the Varkolachi. Aster Wahad, by focusing on the inverse pentagram intensely before sleep, here's a little exercise. Often use a simple mantra or a spell such by raven flight shall I go forth to the undead. Okay, this is by gazing on the inverse or the inverted pentagram. Okay. You could say that mantra. By raven flight shall I go forth to the undead. It will take practice, and it is not always something which will occur. However, when you open those gates and go forth in the dream form you wish, your empowerment upon the path of vampire will grow deeper and stronger. Okay? In various sinister traditions, it is believed that there are vampire beings that dwell in the astral plane, literal spirits of the air. Now, I found this varies from individual to individual's experience, because you as an individual are going to encounter all types of spiritual entities on this path. Some that you have actually created and have been lodged in your subconscious mind, and you will make connection with them or communication with them. So I find this portion, if you have experiences in this avenue or this path, you're going to find out that you can encounter many different things, quote unquote, per se, that you may not be able to classify or identify. Okay, I'm saying classify or identify in a book or something mainstream. So I want to be crystal clear on that. All right. The astral plane is much like a person. To one perception, there is the inner light of self-empowerment, victory, and to another the darkness for which the vampire may build a power fountain within the dreaming etheric body. The netherworld, the realm of the spirits of the air, is shadowy realm which is not seen by our eyes. It is reachable by the rites of darkness, by the dream and our great subconscious. Often the dead and other spirits contact us from the dreaming plane. When they talked about that dark power and that quote that I read in the very beginning by the Descartes, this is what I was talking about. This is what this is talking about here. When you have to connect to that dark power to understand really what it is and what it represents, and get out of your mind all the spooky bullshit that it's evil and it's negative and it's bad and this and that can happen to you. It's only an evil, negative, and bad, and something's going to happen to you if you've convinced yourself. Because the more you think in that perspective and think along those lines, then you're drawing that negativity and energy. You're actually weakening yourself, and you're making yourself susceptible to that type of energy, engulfing you, and your mind starts to accept the reality of it. That's why I said a few minutes back, do your research. Make sure you know what you're doing when you're practicing this spiritual path, because again, this shit is not for everybody. And I've said that before in the past. This is not, I'm curious, I'm curious, let me just see what's going on type of shit. Well, as I said before, curiosity kills the cat. You know what I mean? And I've seen people's curiosity burn them on this path. And then I've seen the flip side. I've seen people who went into it sincere, who did their research and really wanted to, evolve and progress on this path. I've seen those individuals get great benefits out of it and grow. And as it said earlier in that one excerpt that I read a few minutes ago, they look at the world completely different. They look at the world completely different in the sense they're not a slave no more. They're not controlled. They don't perceive things the same way that they might have perceived them before having a thorough understanding of what the spiritual system is and what it represents. All right. Then it goes on to say, black adepts use the mirror, or what we call the obsidian mirror or the black mirror, and the Vorkalachi or Astawad sigil for a focus point, along with a crystal to focus energy. The dark gods, or dark immortals as they are called in the sinister tradition, feed from the blood current of living beings. It infuses them with temporary power to enter further into our physical world. The blood current is being able to look and focus in on somebody, say their solar plexus. Okay? And when it says the blood current, the blood that pumps through the circulatory system, okay, that gives the individual the life, one is able to tap into that blood current and absorb energy. This is why that got confused with vampires drinking blood. It's not talking about the literal drinking of blood. That's not what it means. We'll make that shit crystal clear. It's being able to tap into the blood current of an individual. You understand? And be able to energize or charge yourself. Now, in that absorption process, I mentioned before, you can drain yourself if you absorb too much. And this is where I've seen people get fucked up, not knowing what they're doing. All right? All right, the last section I want to finish up in the last couple minutes is symbolism of blood. And I just kind of started it, talking about that. The consuming of blood has been the cornerstone of the gods. Egyptian gods and goddesses are well centered on the practice of blood drinking. For instance, Sekhmet wanted to destroy humanity. The lion-headed goddess of hate was appeased when Ra instructed her handmaidens to gather beer, mandrakes, and have them pour a mixture over a field to create a red lake. Sekhmet is by this distracted by the body of water, thinking it is blood. She then drinks from it, and by becoming drunk, finds her anger has temporarily passed. The Egyptian pharaoh Unas, okay, and here's some examples of this. Upon physically dying, rises up as God who grows strong by devouring the words of power, another form of absorption, or Heka, and through consuming gods absorbs their power and essence, increasing his own existence. Vampirism is clearly presented here as not only the taking of continued existence, being a predatory spirit, yet gaining further knowledge and power by consuming the sa, or knowledge of all the gods. And if you caught what I said earlier in the beginning of the video, another aspect of vampirism when working with the gods and the goddesses is by absorbing the consciousness and the knowledge that they represent and embodying that consciousness and knowledge. That is a form of vampirism when you're working. And this is why I said we don't look at deities on this path as something literally to worship in an anthropomorphic sense. We look at them as a representation of us subconsciously, what exists in the subconscious mind, the power and the ability that we have as gods and goddesses. So this is what Pharaoh Unas was the master of that, absorbing the knowledge and the wisdom of the gods on a whole different level. And it empowered him. It made him more powerful. It raised him to that godlike status. It gave him that ability to become a god because of the knowledge and the wisdom that he had. Okay? Here's another example. Tibetan Book of the Dead, a Buddhist traditional text which was read aloud to the dying to attain liberation, describes many wrathful deities and even the more peaceful gods as drinking blood. I'm not going to get too much into the Tibet Book of the Dead right now. This reflects the predatory instinct in all living beings, no matter how peaceful they seek to be. Notice I said this represents the survival instinct in any being, because you're predatory by nature. And I've said that before. You're predatory by nature in the sense if you're put in survival mode, you will do whatever, you will become the predator to survive. Because if you don't, then you become the prey. That's what this is talking about. It's that simple. There are 58 burning, shining, blood-drinking, wrathful deities who are transformed from the peaceful deity in the systems of these gods. It is clear to see the balance and transcendence of the opposite. Each is meaningful and clearly supportive of the other in their own cosmic structure. As the individual visualizes these blood-drinking, wrathful deities, it is important for the individual to approach them with trust as old friends, for they are horrifying but yet beneficial. Okay? So approach them with trust. That's what I said, do your research. You got to approach them with the right mindset, because if you approach them in fear and terror, you're going to be stricken with fear and terror and not know how to work with that power and energy. And again, as I said before, man, these deities and these energies, they don't give a fuck about your emotions. They don't have no sympathy for you. They don't have no sorrow or feel sorry for you. They only know one thing: how to convey that raw energy. That's what they do. That's their job. So if you're looking for compassion and to be cuddled, this is the wrong shit. This is not what you want. Trust me when I tell you. If you're looking to tap into that realm of the unknown, right? If you're looking for that and you want to go into that realm of the unknown, that dark power, with the sole intent of evolving and spiritually growing, then you're going to have great results and great success. If you want them curious motherfuckers, I'm telling you right now, don't do it to yourself. Okay? Make sure you're clear on what you're doing. Make sure your intent and your groundwork is laid out and you are completely confident going into that. Again, you can't know everything. You're not supposed to know everything. I'm saying get yourself at least to the point where you're confident and comfortable, and then you'll get the results that you're looking for. Okay? I'm going to stop it there. I think I covered what I wanted to cover on that topic. I'm going to connect it more with Egypt next week. On the next video, I'm going to talk about this vampiric black magical system in ancient Egypt. Get a little more historical on it, go back to its origins, in particular dynasties, because I think it's important to understand this part of Egypt and not just the fluffy shit we like to choose. Not just the mainstream stuff that everybody talks about in ancient Egypt. We need to talk about some of these spiritual sciences so we can grow. Anyway, having said that, again, remember for the events coming up this Friday, August 25th, Cultural Expressions in Hollywood, Florida, 7:30 p.m. start time. And if you want information on any particular or information for spiritual consultations, most definitely you can contact you can contact me at that particular email that I mentioned in the beginning of the show, khnum19@gmail.com, and we'll get that information over to you. Okay. So that's going to wrap it up. I covered what I felt was necessary for today, and we'll continue, and we'll go a little bit more in depth and continue this topic. I'm going to focus moving forward on a little more intense paths of being a black adept. Not going to really, tone things down, because I think we're at a point now where people want this and they need it. And as I said before, it's not for everybody. I'm gonna be honest with you. This shit is not for everybody. And if your next question in your mind is, how do I know it's for me or not? You'll know. Trust me when I tell you. Okay, nobody can answer that for you. You'll have a certain experience where you will know that this is or is not for you. Okay? Peace. Appreciate everybody tuning in.